We're going to talk about a real collision course. Between 1844 and 1877, America was basically being defined by two immense, powerful forces. One was pulling the nation together, introducing new people and new ideas, while the other, it was tearing it apart right from the inside out.
So this brings up a really big question, right? What happens when a nation is completely transformed by new arrivals, while at the very same time, it's being torn apart by a deep, old injustice? And here's the thing. These two stories didn't just happen at the same time. They were deeply and, as we'll see, often violently tangled up with each other.
Okay, so let's start with that first force, this massive wave of human migration. During this period, millions of people arrived from Europe and Asia, and they were about to change the very fabric of the country, whether the country was ready for them or not.
And a huge, huge part of that wave came from Ireland. But their story wasn't just about seeking a better opportunity. For so many, this was about pure survival. They were fleeing one of the most horrific famines of the 19th century.
And look, the Great Hunger, the potato famine, it was just absolutely devastating. Millions fled, and a huge number of them landed in American cities like New York. But life there was brutal. They were often crammed into slums like the infamous 5 Points neighborhood, facing just unbelievable conditions: disease, widespread unemployment, and some of the highest infant mortality rates in the entire country. It took just an incredible amount of grit to even make it.
Now, the Irish weren't the only ones arriving in huge numbers. German immigrants were also coming over, but often with different goals in mind. While plenty settled in cities, a lot of them were drawn by the promise of land and a fresh start out on the American frontier.
And even in the big cities, they built these incredibly vibrant cultural pockets. In Manhattan's Klein Deutschland, which just means Little Germany, they set up their own German-language schools, churches, and newspapers. This really shows you that immigrants weren't just trying to survive, they were actively shaping American culture. You have figures like Rabbi Isaac Meyerwise, a German immigrant who founded Hebrew Union College, adding totally new layers to the nation's religious landscape.
And listen, it wasn't just Europeans crossing the Atlantic. Over on the West Coast, a really significant wave of Asian immigrants began to arrive, and they built these sophisticated community structures to help each other out in this new land.
The level of organization in these communities, it was just remarkable. In San Francisco, you had the Six Companies, which were basically these benevolent associations that provided crucial aid, helped people find jobs, and even offered legal defense. You had cultural anchors like the Tin Hau Temple, which was founded all the way back in 1852. And you got to remember, this wasn't some brand new thing. The Filipino village of St. Malo down in Louisiana shows that Asian communities had been putting down deep roots in America for a long, long time.
So, as you can imagine, this massive shift in who was living in America, well, it did not go unnoticed, and it definitely wasn't welcomed by everyone. In fact, it sparked a fierce and really potent anti-immigrant backlash from native-born Americans.
This backlash actually has a name: nativism. And the key thing to get here is that this wasn't just, random grumbling. It was a policy, a full-blown ideology aimed at protecting the interests of the native-born against immigrants. And during this time, that feeling was intensely anti-Catholic, which meant the Irish were a huge target.
And look, this nativism wasn't just talk. It took on 3 really concrete and frankly dangerous forms. First, you got the political side, with the Know Nothing Party becoming a major force in the 1850s, fighting to slash immigrant rights. Then it got violent, like in the Philadelphia riots of 1844, where churches were burned down and dozens of people died. And finally, it got written into law through discriminatory court decisions.
Just take a look at this. It comes from an 1854 California Supreme Court case, People v. Hall. Just let that sink in for a second. The highest court in the state ruled that people of Chinese descent could not testify against white people. This decision basically stripped an entire community of its voice in the justice system, leaving them incredibly vulnerable and writing racial discrimination directly into the law.
So while all of this is going on, this whole drama with immigration and backlash, the nation is also straining under its other huge conflict, this irreconcilable divide over the economics of slavery.
You have to understand, America was basically two different countries living under one flag, with two totally different economies. In the North, you had this rapidly industrializing society built on what they called free labor, people working for wages, a system that was now being fueled by millions of new immigrants. For many Northerners, even those who weren't abolitionists, slavery felt like a threat to their entire way of life. But in the South, a completely different world. It was an agricultural kingdom, and its entire economy was built on the forced labor of enslaved people. This wasn't just a simple disagreement. It was a fundamental clash of civilizations.
And, as you can probably guess, this massive economic clash, it just fueled this incredibly passionate, deeply personal, and increasingly volatile war of words between those who wanted to end slavery and those who would do anything to defend it.
So out of this tension, you get the rise of this really powerful and loud abolitionist movement. It was a diverse group of black and white activists, and they launched this fierce moral crusade against slavery. And they used every single tool they had at their disposal: the printing press, the public stage, and just their own incredible personal courage.
And what's really amazing when you look at it is just how many different strategies they used. You had people fighting with words, like the incredible Frederick Douglass, whose speeches just laid bare the horrors of slavery, or Harriet Beecher Stowe, whose novel Uncle Tom's Cabin brought the moral reality of it right into people's living rooms. Then you had people who took direct action, like the fearless Harriet Tubman on the Underground Railroad. And then you had others, like John Brown and the visionary Sojourner Truth, who pushed the movement even further, connecting abolition to ideas of armed rebellion and women's rights.
But you know, the movement wasn't all on the same page. You had powerful voices like Henry Highland Garnet, who, as early as 1843, was openly calling for enslaved people to rise up and violently overthrow their captors. This shows you there was a whole wing of the abolitionist movement that was basically saying, you know what, we're done talking. Peaceful persuasion is not going to work.
Okay, so on the other side of this fiery debate, the South is building up an equally passionate defense of its peculiar institution, trying to justify what to many in the world was becoming unjustifiable.
Their whole defense really rested on a few main pillars. First, and this is a big one, it was built on these deeply racist ideologies that argued black people were inferior. Then they pushed this twisted, paternalistic idea that slavery was a positive social good, that it somehow benefited everyone involved. Pro-slavery advocates also insisted it was protected by the Constitution and states' rights, and they even created their own pop culture, their own counter-narratives, like anti-Uncle Tom novels, to paint this completely false, romanticized picture of plantation life. And if you want to boil their economic argument down to one phrase, this is it: cotton is king. This quote from Senator James Henry Hammond really says it all. He was basically arguing that the entire global economy ran on Southern cotton, which of course was produced by enslaved labor. So in his mind, slavery wasn't just some Southern institution. It was essential for global prosperity. It was the absolute bedrock of their whole world.
So, here we are. You've got these two massive forces, a country being totally reshaped by new people, and at the same time being ripped apart over its oldest, deepest wound. And they're on a collision course. And that crash, it was becoming unavoidable.
Yeah, this really captures the whole crisis, doesn't it? On one side, you have these new immigrant populations changing what it even meant to be an American. On the other, you have this fundamental conflict between free labor and enslaved labor that's about to boil over. And the thing is, these weren't separate stories. The arguments about who belongs, who gets to be a citizen, what freedom really means, it was all tangled together, pushing a very fragile nation right to the brink.
And that really makes you think, doesn't it? When you look at how all these different groups fought for their place and how these clashing visions of what America should be played out, it leaves us with a pretty big question. How much of that 19th century struggle over identity, over who belongs, and over the true meaning of freedom still echoes in the debates we're having right now, today?